Hey, yeah, what's up? This disciple Marcello Kearns reign back up in this anti-Illuminati all day, anti-telepathy all day, anti-America all day, and everybody with them. So this message is going to be basically about if Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had lived in this country. If they had lived and not been assassinated by the American community, what would it be? What would this country be? We will never truly know. We will never know all the speeches. We will never know all the progress that could have been made. We'll never know. We'll never know what they could have done and what the black community could have been. You'll never know. The crack epidemic could have been stopped by Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. It could have been stopped by Malcolm X speeches. The crack epidemic could have been stopped as a duel of both of their speeches, two of them both pleading. And we'll never know. The black community never recovered from the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. They never recovered. They didn't recover. You don't have anybody else. You haven't had anybody else even close. Not even close to the caliber of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. You haven't had anybody even close. Yeah, so um, all I can say is this is the reason why the African American community look like it does. Those were leaders that were supposed to lead all the way longer than we realized. They were supposed to lead the American community for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They could have even still been alive. Yeah, they could have been. Yep. 80s, in their 80s or 90s, still could be alive. Hey, Betty White's still alive. Betty White is still alive. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X could still be alive. So we could still literally technically have them now, right now. Mm-mm-mm. That's what, see? And they would have affected, you can't say they would have not affected the music. They would have affected so much. That that took the heart out of the black community. People, I'm gonna say that again. That took the heart out of the black African American community. It took the heart out. We see now that we're at the end of times, there was nobody close to that, and nobody showed up. But what I think personally is the crack epidemic and all of that was to make sure that there would never be another Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X again. That was the onslaught. Now that I think about it, they sent that all in just to make sure there was no Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And it did such a horrible job on the community there never was. Not anyone that close, not that close. And young, they was in their 30s. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the stories of Moses and the stories of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Um, there were both onslaughts from kings, rulers to destroy them. They had rulers that were trying to destroy them, which was satanic, which was Satan's kingdom trying to stop Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, and trying to stop Moses. So in Jesus' case, King Herod, if I'm saying it right, he ordered kids, I think 2.5 and under, to be killed, just so he could try to kill Jesus. A lot of y'all don't know this story. Satan's kingdom tried to kill Jesus before he was born. Satan's kingdom tried to kill Jesus before he fulfilled his destiny. Same thing with Moses. They were killing babies, and Moses was floated up the river, up the Nile River, because they were killing kids, and that was against Moses. So, what I believe is that this same method was taken here in America. There was an onslaught to kill the youth, so there would never be another Martin Luther King Jr. and another Malcolm X. And they were successful. There was never another Malcolm X. There was never another Martin Luther King Jr. that had their head on straight enough to lead the people. I'm showing you how they got you. And they use cocaine and drugs to destroy and send a tsunami of destruction to swallow up anybody that would be like Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. You got to think about it. You got to look at the times and the time frames of all of that. Okay? And this is why I think it was done. This is part of the reason I think it was done, along with other things, to destroy anybody that would be anything like Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. That's why you never had anyone like him. It was the culture. Why didn't America produce, or the Black African American community produce, another Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X? Why not? Because the culture was so destructive to a leader, someone to oppose detrimental things to the Black community, that it was almost impossible for them to escape it. They were either selling drugs, killing, drinking, having kids, or something. And we'll never know now, with all these killings of police killing kids. Thank you, Father. We'll never know if one of the next Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr.'s were killed by police. These are the onslaughts. They did this in Jesus' time. They went and killed all the potentials. Anybody, they killed as many as they could to make sure that Jesus Christ, the Messiah, would not rise up. Same thing with Moses. So we'll never know if one of these guys that got shot by the police, one of these women that got shot We'll never know if they were the next Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. With all the destruction that's in the African American community, we will never know if the person that was supposed to be the next Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. We'll never know if they, because of all the destruction, we'll never know if they were swallowed up in that destruction. We'll never know. So this is the saddest part of this shows us now that we realize all this time has went by and nobody has been like that. It shows us that how important they were to us. It shows us. It shows us how important they were. We didn't come up with a new one. You didn't come up with a new Martin Luther King Jr. You didn't come up with a new Malcolm X. You didn't come up with anybody even close to that. So, what does that tell us? Those were our leaders. Those were supposed to be our fathers that lead this country. They were way more special than we want to give credit to now that we see that no one else is like them. And, like I said, all these onslaughts, I believe, was just to kill anybody. Do I think it was anybody from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? Because by that time, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were killed by 1970. So 3 decades, do I think it was anybody like Martin Luther King Jr. that was killed? Yes. Do I think it was anybody like Malcolm X? Yes. Because it was too much bloodshed, it was too much gang banging, Crips and Bloods, crack, all of this, broken homes from crack. And that's what I wanted to say. Even if they didn't get caught up in the game, their parents might have got caught up in the game. So they went into, they got out into the streets and then, they got swallowed up. Could have been an innocent kid, got hit by stray bullets, a baby. I'm showing you all the onslaught and why we don't have the leaders. They produced a killing machine within the American community, and no leaders were produced. No leaders were produced after Martin Luther King Jr. They had and Malcolm X. They had the killing machine. The killing machine was placed in the ghetto, and it slaughtered hundreds of thousands and millions. From kids getting hit by stray bullets. That could have been a Martin Luther King Jr. riding a bike that got hit by a stray bullet. It could have been a Martin Luther King Jr. that was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. It could have been a Martin Luther King Jr. that didn't have a father figure and joined Crips or joined Bloods or joined any other gang. You know what I'm saying? They're human after all. So leaders are human. Promised leaders are human. And it's easy for them to get caught up. They could have turned to all types of situations. They may still be out there, but lost, drunk, destroyed, out of their mind. You can't be drunk and lead the country. I'm say that again. You can't be a drunk and lead the country. You can't be high and lead the country. You can't do it. You have to be sound, sober of mind in order to accurately see everything and sense everything clearly. So that's what it is. This is why, like I said, I believe that there are no MLKs and Malcolm X's. It's because of the onslaught of destruction in the black community. That's the only thing that makes sense. Think about it. You got all this gangbanging, you got all these stray bullets, kids that were infants and stuff, killed. That was going on way long time ago. People abandoning their babies. That could have been a Malcolm X. That could have been a Martin Luther King. Somebody that threw their baby in a dumpster. That could have been a Malcolm X. There was so much onslaught in America. There was so much onslaught of destruction that I believe whoever was supposed to be after Martin Luther King and Malcolm X was swallowed up in whatever it was, and all this stuff that's going on out here. It's easy to assume that with seeing how much of it was going on, especially in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s when the cocaine was just flowing in. The cocaine was flowing in for the next 2 decades. All of the 70s, definitely all of the 80s. Some type of dope was going on in the 70s. But all the 80s was definitely cocaine. And when you ain't get no Malcolm X out of that, you ain't get no Martin Luther King out of the whole 80s, all you got was entertainers and dancers and singers. They traded you political leaders, national leaders, for national singers. You got your Michael Jackson. They say you ain't gotta have Malcolm X, just have Michael Jackson. I know you don't like this, but you know it's the truth. I'm not saying Michael Jackson wasn't talented. I'm saying that, and I'm not saying he was not worth watching. What I'm saying is the influence, the perspective was, here's your leader. Don't talk about all that. Don't talk about all these things that's going on. Just sit and all the black people come and sit and watch Michael Jackson. Don't you want to be like Michael Jackson? Look how he dances. Look how he acts. Look what he does. Don't you want to be Michael? They swallowed up, and I could go on and on with rappers too. They put all these people before you to take your perspective of even the need to become a leader. To become a leader to lead the people. They took all of that perspective through your entertainers. They traded your leaders, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., for Michael Jacksons. That's what they did. You care more about Michael. You care more about dancing. You care more about being like Michael. You care more about dancing around women than you cared about the state of your community. Before that, the Michael Jacksons was Malcolm X. These were the superstars. These were the true superstars. I mean, you had James Brown, definitely the Godfather of Soul. I'm not taking nothing away from him. But the true superstars bigger than life, besides James Brown, would be the people that spoke up for the community. Okay? That influence over the people to be like this and to be like-minded was totally taken away. And now that, it was like America says, you don't have to try to think like Martin Luther King Jr. You don't have to think like Malcolm X. Think like Michael Jackson. I'm not saying Michael Jackson was wrong. I'm saying there were other motives for pushing the Michael Jacksons. And you never had a Malcolm X, And you never had a Martin Luther King Jr. or anything close to it during the time of Michael Jackson. You had nothing close like that. You had nobody like not even close. So this is what I'm trying to show you. You have totally been wiped out as far as a leader that will lead your community. You could think I'm crazy if you want to, if you want. But you still need a leader when you got situations like Dante Wright. You still need a leader when you got situations like George Floyd. You still need leaders when Joe Biden is messing up 20 years of progress in a war across seas. You still need leaders when you got Donald Trump holding back a response on COVID and causing all this confusion when he did it to just get reelected. You need leaders to show you this, to lead you and to guide you out of the clutches of the enemy. And so I'm showing you, I'm not saying it's going to actually happen. I'm showing you why there's destruction. So you will make no mistake about it why you are in the state that you're in. You know why you're in the state that you're in. You ain't got no leaders. They wiped out your leaders. In the decades after that, they sent onslaughts of drugs. They sent onslaughts of culture and all type of entertainers to make sure that there would be never a person that even want to be like Martin Luther King Jr. Nobody even wanted to be like that. Nobody even wanted to be like Malcolm X. We looked at the books from afar. We looked at all the paraphernalia from afar, but no one actually said, let me sit down and watch this. Kids were watching Martin Luther King Jr. in his time. They were watching Malcolm X. Kids were watching that. Yeah, you could barely get a kid to even sit down and watch 3 minutes of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X these days. You lucky if you get 3 minutes of that. Okay? So I'm trying to show you, you know what I'm saying? It's a reason why it is the way it is. It's a reason. It's not just so, it just so happened to be. That's superstition. Superstition doesn't have a real reality. Spirituality and superstition is not the same thing. And unfortunately, a lot of you guys walk in superstition. And you frown on spirituality, but you're superstitious. You're superstitious when you just think that things just happen to be the way it is. You're superstitious when you don't sit up and wonder why no one came along like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. It didn't happen because the crack went crazy and it was a wildfire. It tore up every city, and they made sure it tore up every city. Any city you can name. That was an act of war. And you didn't even realize it. You were balling out of control, hustling. I even sold a little crack. And little did you know, we all were part of being blinded to looking for leaders and becoming leaders ourselves and becoming students of the truth, becoming students of the history of America. You know what I mean? And so you can't expect white people to point this out. You can't expect other races to point this out. You can't expect them to do this. You have to see it for what it is for yourself, because they're not going to sit up and tell you what they did. Okay? They ain't going to tell you what they did. They're going to tell you word for word, well, you know, we sent that in because we didn't want to see any more Martin Luther King Jr.'s walking around here. You think they're going to tell you that? It's clear to see they didn't want any more Martin Luther King Jr.'s. It's clear to see because they conspired against him, and the American government was part of conspiring against him because he put corrupt money in trouble, and he obviously helped black people, African Americans, get free. This is the reason. That's why they did it. And this is the country you still live in. This is the country where no one has risen up. This is the country that people are still passive. This is the country where everyone is still at each other's necks. This is the country that fights community instead of fighting the government. This is the same country. That's why I don't take any challenges off of anybody. I would end someone's life that tries to rise up against me. I will end your life because you're such a coward that you never faced your own government and people that killed you and killing you right now. And the reason why COVID is out of control right now. Nobody is thinking about uprising against them, but you want to uprise against everyday people and people like me. I cut your throat. I'm sorry to tell you. I keep my weapons. And I'm a good man. But I am not going to allow people to play games with someone like me when I know you ain't challenging the real enemy. That's where I'm infuriated at. I know you're not challenging the real enemy.